Hello, everyone. My name's Matt Atkinson. I can see a number of you are joining live now. We're just going to wait a minute to allow as many people to enter the webinar as possible, and then we will kick things off with a quick reintroduction of the topic and then our panelists as well. So sit tight. I can see you all joining, and we will be with you in just a moment. All right, I can see a large number of you are here live already. I appreciate you joining us today. Again, my name's Matt Atkinson. I am a Global Project Director at Reuters Events Pharma, and I have the privilege of being your moderator for the next hour. We are here today to discuss medical affairs and the move from virtual to hybrid engagement, and looking to also to talk about how you can achieve holistic engagement to meet quickly evolving needs of HCPs, KOLs, and patients. Whether it's e-congresses and virtual advisory boards or omni-channel HCP engagement and virtual meetings, medical affairs ongoing digital transformation has been as quick as it has been wide-ranging. It's presented new challenges with increased digital noise and HCP fatigue, and required a host of internal and strategic capability recalibrations for across MSLs, platform and content strategies. The catalyst for this acceleration, we all know, but the long-term objective hasn't changed: to provide a more refined customer experience, increasing speed, flexibility, and personalization to meet the needs of quickly evolving HCPs, KOLs, and patients. So we have brought together today a host of medical affairs leaders to discuss these key changes, and I would now like to introduce my esteemed panel. Thank you so much for joining us. If you wouldn't mind all giving a quick introduction, and I will start with Kate, please.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Really glad to see you joined. Kate Petrito. I'm the Director of Medical Operations at Varian Medical Systems. I joined about a year ago to oversee the build out of our Interventional Solutions division. So this is interesting because we're a little bit of a startup in a mature company, but for those of you who work for smaller organizations, I have a lot to share about the dynamics of that. I've been in medical affairs for 14 years. Previous to that, I was a medical writer, and I've been in the interventional space for 8 years.
Thanks, Kate. Sanal.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Sanal Bhatia. I'm a physician by training, and I've been at Pfizer for the last 14 years, all within medical affairs. The last 4.5 years have been primarily in the rare disease organization, and I lead an organization of headquarter-based medical affairs as well as field-based medical colleagues across US and Canada. So this has been, quite frankly, a year of transformation, or 2020 has been, and I'm excited to share some of our insights. Thank you.
Thanks, Sanal. Eddie.
Hi, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where in the world you are. My name is Eddie Guzder. I'm the head of medical for neurology and immunology at Sanofi here in the UK and Ireland. I'm also a practicing physician in the NHS in London, and I sit on a number of expo groups relating to digital health and medical devices with the Royal College of Physicians. I have a keen interest in digital even before the pandemic hit us.
Thanks, Eddie. And last but not least, Lance.
Hello, everyone. I'm Lance Hill. I'm the CEO of Within3 and the founder. For the last 13 years, our company has really been focusing on trying to virtualize and digitize communication in the life sciences space, a huge focus on medical affairs. We work with the top 20 pharmaceutical companies, a whole host of small and mid-range med tech, med device, life science, biotech sorts of organizations. And so happy to be here with everyone.
Thanks, Lance. All right, before we kick off into the discussion, Lance is going to do a short presentation for us, kind of help set up the rest of the hour we have together. Lance, please take it away.
Let me go ahead and share my screen. So I just thought to make sure we're all using some of the same terms for what we're going to talk about today in terms of hybrid meetings and virtual. It's just a little bit of a primer. So when we think about virtual meetings, there's a couple of flavors of virtual meetings that are prevalently used in the industry. One is real-time sorts of settings like we're having right now, video conferences, webinars, when everyone's at the same place at the same time, kind of maybe mimicking what you might do if everyone was in, a hotel room or a conference room at the same time. And most companies have adopted these technologies ubiquitously. Certainly COVID accelerated anyone who was maybe at the tail end of that forward like it needed to. And so real-time sorts of meetings are generally very, very good for small groups or for presentations like we're having right now. When you get a lot of people into a real-time sort of setting, imagine you have 10 physicians all in an hour video conference at the same time, you're really getting about 6 minutes of dialogue out of each and every physician and 54 minutes of listening out of every physician. And so as you start to talk about larger groups or opportunities where you need a lot of different people interacting, another flavor of virtual meeting is an overtime virtual meeting. And so for those who aren't familiar with that, I'll just highlight a couple of those things, how they work. But an overtime virtual meeting is more like an online university concept where a room is opened up for a series of, a couple of days or a couple of weeks. Content materials are added and people can log in when they want to and have discussions, kind of like a social media sort of environment. They can log in, review materials, answer questions, reply to each other, tag each other, interact back and forth. These sorts of environments, you can do that with kind of open-ended questions. How do you feel about the latest data results that we have from the study? Quantitative sorts of things. Which of these 5 criteria would be most important in selecting a trial site, et cetera. Document annotation. So these tools, loading documents in PowerPoint up, for example, or a reimbursement form, and having people provide feedback directly on documents. It's all kind of logged and tallied over time and have discussions directly within the documents. From that to co-editing, the ability to have a group of authors create a manuscript together online in a durable fashion that's all integrated. And even private sorts of things, blinded, double blinded, one-on-one interviews. So these environments are very, very flexible in today's world to allow a lot of different types of discussions. One of the things that they do a little bit differently in a real-time sort of engagement is they automatically translate languages. And so our solution, for example, translates 100 different languages in real time, and we deliver services in 12 or 15 languages at this point around the globe. And they're also very good at dictation as well. So it's not just typing. So if you're a physician, you're used to using Dragon as an EMR to dictate into your EMR, et cetera. These solutions allow speech to text, so people can be kind of talking into their microphone and engaging in this kind of overtime online university style sort of environment. And then the output from these gets transcripted automatically for you in a very structured way. So that's kind of an overtime environment. Just a quick look at our data. We look at the last 1,000 medical affairs sessions that we've done. About 45% of them are advisory boards. A couple of years ago, that would have been about 75%. So what's happening in the industry is as people are adopting these virtual types of technologies, the sorts of things they're using them for, from internal meetings to around medical congresses, virtual or otherwise, to steering committees and pub planning, those are expanding as companies get more familiar with these tools and more ingrained with them. And so when you look at the kind of the two together, if you were to try to choose between one, video conferencing for a larger group is really, really good at presentations and that sort of thing. An online discussion platform is good at kind of deep sorts of engagement around topics or materials. Not so good at kind of spontaneous, nonverbal communication that a live meeting does. And so companies mix and match with these different tools. And this is just a chart that we've come up with over time as we've seen when do companies tend to use kind of the video conference sort of thing? When do they use the online discussion sort of thing? And when do a lot of times do they use both? So maybe I have, which we call a hybrid meeting. So maybe I have a WebEx where I am presenting some data followed by an online discussion about the details of that data. So companies mix and match these venues very routinely. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is these different venues and the experiences that we've had with them and where we see the future. So I will go ahead and stop sharing if you like and turn it back over to you, Matt.
Awesome. Thank you, Lance. I want to quickly remind everyone that this is an interactive webinar, so feel free to ask your questions below if you have them now or as we go along. But I would want to get you involved right away. So come back to your screen if you're not looking at it right now, because we're going to launch our first poll, and it says what will be the new balance of remote versus face-to-face interaction once all restrictions are lifted. And I've been a bit broader there with once all restrictions lifted, because I know we're a worldwide audience, and I didn't want to put a timestamp on it, perhaps. I'm going to leave that over for a little while, and I would like to come and hear from my panelists now. And we're talking about virtual engagement strategies, and a lot has changed over the last year. So I'd be interested to hear sort of the changes you've made and how you've optimized your strategy over the last 12 months, and even hear a little bit about what you're looking to do as we go throughout the year.
So I'm happy to start, Matt. I have to say that the first few months, we were all really just struggling and trying to figure out what to do. So, you know, obviously, when you look back the last 12 months, a lot has changed. And luckily, our field force was well versed with technology. That is the number one thing, that you want to make sure they have the latest technology so that they can have those virtual conversations with their customers. But the customers were not quite there, right? So when you're thinking about a WebEx or a Zoom session, many of our HCPs were not really traditionally using a forum like that. So it's a two-way dialogue. And while we may have been ready with the technology, our customers were just starting to get started. And so often I realized that we found ourselves teaching them, like, oh, click on this, click on that. And eventually you got onto that forum where you could finally have a conversation. And I look back now, fast forward 12 months later, it is pretty spectacular to see the change agility, not only in our own field team members, but also in our customers who've adapted to telemedicine and the ability to use a virtual forum. And I think that's going to change very quickly how we now conduct our business over the next 12 months, which will be very different from the last 12. I don't know, Kate, Eddie, what do you think?
I'll go next. Sorry, Kate. Yeah, I think a lot of it, you know, what you're saying is absolutely right. We've all been on a learning journey, both internally within the company, but also externally. Our customers have been on a similar learning journey. And for us this year, a lot of it's around quality of engagement. So as everybody goes on this learning journey, everybody starts to do very similar things, which makes the competition for content that's out there enormous. So for us this year, it's much more focused around how do we create quality engagement, how do we create impact with the content that we share, what other channels can we use? So social media has come up even beyond the routine technologies. And how do we do that in a way that differentiates us and allows healthcare professionals to want to engage with us versus all the other variety of content that exists on the internet. So I think that's our real challenge this year, this move from quantity in the context of a lockdown, in the context where physicians were redeployed, to quality and impact through all the tools that we have at our disposal, including many which Lance mentioned earlier. Over to you, Kate.
No, I love it and totally agree. We had the same learning curve that I'm sure all of industry has experienced over the past year. It was quite significant. You know, looking forward, I think a lot about the nimbleness that we've all realized is possible with digital engagement. You know, it's funny, I had actually been trying to bring in this tool since I think 2018 to my previous organization. And I got a lot of blank stares at the idea of like, well, why would we move to virtual? But looking back at my career of 14 years of planning ad boards, there have been a whole lot of times that we've said, we really need this ad board ASAP because we have this objective that we need to meet. And trying to figure out how to get a panel of physicians and all your internal stakeholders in a room in the same place is really difficult to do in a nimble way. And in medtech, we're thinking about potential acquisitions or, steering our innovation team to really understand customer needs. Like these things really do have sometimes short timelines. So I think that that's a great space where we'll continue to use virtual engagement moving forward.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. I think partly what the COVID situation did is a lot of folks who are maybe on the fence, kind of sort of interested, but not really had an impetus to go ahead and adopt some of these virtual technologies, and let alone broadly in what they're doing, or obviously forced to. And I think everyone is kind of understanding at this point the pros and cons of different approaches. Certainly there is nimbleness. While I'm looking forward to travel restrictions ending, I'm personally not looking forward to being on a plane every week, going to Dallas and then going to London and then going to whatever for a day here and 3 days there. And the healthcare professionals and patients and other customers that we interact with are going to be in the same mode as well. And so I think with the industry having these tools at their disposal, and then when live comes back, that's another tool, but it's another engagement tool. Having them all at the disposal to choose the right ones in the right way, I think has really improved the industry's ability to communicate with its customers.
Thank you all. I am going to end our first poll now and share the results with you. No remote, all face-to-face with 0%, thankfully, and then some remote, majority face-to-face, 15%. The majority of you at 49% believe that there'll be a balance of remote versus face-to-face interaction. And then 34% saying some face-to-face, majority remote, and then 2% saying no face-to-face and all remote. I'd be interested on getting your opinions, panelists. Does that sort of align with what you believe and what you expected the audience to say?
I think it reflects how people feel and how our customers feel as well. So we talk a lot about the pros of digital, the pros of virtual engagement, but there's also a huge amount of digital fatigue that we've had in the last year. And I think even though the future model is hybrid, what's really happened is it's made technology more acceptable. So it's now okay to use Zoom with a customer versus before the preference would always have been face-to-face. So it's the acceptability that's really evolved, but also we're all human beings. We all want to have face-to-face engagement as well. And I suspect we'll have an upsurge when lockdowns across countries end in face-to-face engagement actually before people rebalance towards that digital mindset as well. So I think it really reflects how everyone in society is feeling right now. We do want both.
Yeah. I also think that balance will vary depending on what you're trying to accomplish. So if you're in a pre-launch phase and you're trying to seek out new customers, as are your competitors, you're going to want to potentially be there more face-to-face if feasible. And if you're not, and if you're digital, how does one feel that the competition's out there face-to-face? How do you even know that's happening? So that play will come in a little later once everybody's, to Lance's point, able to get on a plane and willing to get on a plane and be at an airport and actually go see those customers. But I agree, the first item that showed, nobody wants to go back to all face-to-face. I mean, that's zero. And yet, go back 15 months ago, it was all face-to-face. We barely used our technology to communicate. So a lot has changed.
Yeah, I agree. That's what's really interesting about this. I was imagining the same thing. Like, I wonder what this poll would have been 15 months ago. What the spread would have been. It probably would have been quite different. There are probably organizations like, we just don't do virtual. That's not our thing. Or we do it in a very limited way. And now that's kind of not the case. And then I'm imagining what's it going to be 12 months from now. People have now been in this environment for 18 months. And again, I'm imagining an environment where even as travel restrictions lift, to Eddie's point, competition for these same folks is now everybody's trying to figure out the rebalance at once. There's only so many hours in their day as well. And so it's going to be interesting as it goes. But I think the key message that we all agree with is that the mix is here to stay going forward. It's just the fabric of how we do what we do going forward.
Mm. I think would have been interesting too if we compared that to perhaps our commercial colleagues across the industry and how those two would align, because I imagine there might have been a larger number on that return to face-to-face versus medical affairs, which I think has probably seen the value of that digital engagement perhaps a little bit more than some commercial colleagues. Kate, you touched on it just before. You had got a digital product to be, used and invested in, whilst having struggled 2 years previously to get that over the line. And my question is around: did you change your approach to get some of these digital products, being used internally? And the rest of you, what's been your approach to getting some digital products invested in perhaps over the last 12 months? And again, do you see that change or any change over the next 12 months looking forward as well? But Kate, to you first.
So I think during COVID, it was a much easier sell because we had, an acute need to engage in a way that was beyond Zoom and really allowed people to share. I mean, with Zoom, we're experiencing, people accidentally interrupting each other and sound lags and things like that. Plus, I also think, we just have, a customer set that is, very strained. Physicians are very strained right now. So having the ability for them to kind of check in over time was a huge advantage. Longer term, I can absolutely imagine that, the ease of getting the yes internally to, expensive products like this, there could be a little bit more work, but I also now have all the data behind it, right? To suggest, for specific use cases, why it's been such a great addition to our arsenal of tools. And I imagine that to remain being the case.
I want to ask a couple of questions here from the audience as well. And we talked about hybrid just before, and I might revert back slightly because I think this is an interesting question. Thoughts, it's from an anonymous attendee, but talking about the hybrid Congress. So being able to bring the virtual together with the face-to-face so that you're meeting, what we all talk and what we hope to achieve is customer centricity in the end, and being able to deliver what the customer wants. Perhaps, Lance, I might come to you first with this, given your role within 3 and the platform. I imagine it's something you've thought about, and what do you see as being the preferred route to kind of helping achieve this?
Yeah, we do a lot of work around congresses, and I guess the way I would think about that as a challenge is dividing it into two parts. So part number one is the actual Congress itself, the attendees, the track sessions, and using those are all obviously being done virtually right now, just like this conference is being done virtually, and being able to make sure you can attend those and be present. And engage. It's very easy in a virtual setting to kind of have a sidebar. So you could be having a virtual advisory board happening on an overtime platform. So you're not interrupting track sessions and people can interact while the Congress is going on, or just before or just after. And so you're creating for those healthcare professionals a venue where they're getting information from a Congress and they're interacting with you, and they're not trying to hit 3 lunch or dinner meetings in the same night to try to see everyone they're working with. It creates a really powerful form for the attendees of a Congress, the customer set. But also important, I think, is the work that goes on the industry side. When you have MSLs trying to cover 6 different track sessions and consolidate notes and what's happening in the industry and who did we meet with and how did all that work, virtual technologies are really, really strong, especially, again, the overtime ones where they can come back, have those discussions online when they need to. Really lowers the workload for MSLs and those who are really responsible for summarizing what did we learn at this Congress, what does it mean to our strategy. So we see we call them Congress huddles. For those who do those in a live setting, e-Congress huddles are becoming very, very commonplace just because they're just so much more efficient. Those were happening before COVID, just the e-Congress huddle piece around the live meetings, because it's so much more efficient to manage the scientific exchange from an industry point of view. And now it's just really becoming more robust.
Cool, thanks, Lance. I want to touch on two very related topics now. Second is going to be around sort of digital measurement, but first is around data, because it's as with the move to digital, we all have so much more of it. But I'd be interested to hear from you all where you see yourselves in your sort of data journey and where you're moving to, but importantly in that move, what are you kind of focusing on? I'm trying to think of some takeaways from the audience here, because I'm sure, like most, data has been a challenge over the last 12 months, and ensuring that it's aligned and that you're using it correctly. So be interested to hear how you've gone through that process and if there is any tips for our audience here today.
Yeah, I mean, I think taking from Lance's comments about congresses and being virtual or hybrid, what's going to happen is a lot more customers are going to be able to join these congresses. Typically in the past, if they couldn't travel, that was it. They weren't allowed to be there. And we've seen that the number of attendees has grown substantially in e-congresses. So I think that e-part is going to stay. I do see us potentially going to some form of face-to-face as well, hence the hybrid. But because of that, and because the e-component's here to stay, the data becomes really important, because we need to move away from traditional slide presentations and a podium presentation with decks and preps, and give our customers snippets of relevant and important data, because now they're exposed to so much more. And so I envision a future where we're all finding ways to develop small formats of data, snippets that they're going to be able to take in, understand instantly, and not have to go through 10 or 20 slides to get the core message. So what's that bottom line you're trying to communicate is going to have to be what you communicate first up, and that will need to be the message that stays with patients. So TikTok, Instagram, that kind of format for our customers at a professional platform is potentially what the future is going to look like. And our kids will laugh at us when we talk about the slide kits we used to create.
They already are. Yeah,
they already are. Yes.
Let's not kid ourselves.
No one wants 120 slides. I completely agree. And it's interesting because I think, in so many ways, the life sciences industry has evolved over the past 15 years, and COVID accelerated some of those things. But, thinking internally, my commercial colleagues have long sought to deliver training to the sales team, right? And snippets, 5-7 minute videos. And it's something that I don't think we necessarily really reflected on as being relevant to medical affairs. And I think it's proven that it has.
I agree. I think we talked a lot about virtual congresses and e-congress, and I think everyone's right. The numbers have increased. The number of people that subscribe to it increase. When you actually look at the detail of the number of healthcare professionals that actually attend what they subscribe for the full event, it's much lower, because nobody wants to sit in a room for the whole congress, rehearing presentation after presentation. People benefit from the networking. So I think there will always be some face-to-face there. I think the point around creation of smaller snippets is absolutely fair. It's happening as we speak in the form of podcasts, in the form of 2 to 3 minute video clips. And the other piece is, how do we disseminate that? So is that through the Congress itself? But particularly for medical, where a lot of it is science and non-promotional, can we use other channels that are more open to the public as well? I think is the piece that we're thinking about, through social media, through other podcast programs as well. And how do we disseminate that information? Because again, if everybody's doing it, clinicians have a lot to choose from, and why should they pick you? That's our constant challenge at the moment.
Yeah, another angle on this part of the conversation is a side effect of things being digital is, one way or another, everything's recorded. So you can see the recording button happening right now. And so the ability, like Sonal was saying, to take maybe a 3-minute snippet of an interesting part of this discussion that might be relevant to a different audience and provide that becomes possible if you have that capability. If you're doing some of the overtime source of discussions, those are all being output in structured transcripts that you can take verbatim sorts of quotes and do things. Your customers, the presentations they're having are now more readily online and durable that you can go back to. And so I think it's helpful internally as well to kind of imagine a world moving away from the old idea in a way, which is like, I'm an MSL, I met a doctor, I went home and I typed my notes in the Viva or whatever I'm typing my notes into, and that's kind of it, to a scenario where a higher percentage of the interactions are more, have more of an enduring asset that you can use. I think innovative companies are going to use that to their advantage, both to decrease their workload, but also in terms of having to go create more content, but also to curate what's important for their leaders to know about different things that are happening. And literally, it's more powerful going to a leader and saying, we need to go left because here's verbatim information from a physician who's describing this problem or a patient who's describing a problem, than kind of an abstract PowerPoint sort of dialogue. So I think really understanding that part of it, that there's enduring asset is being created, and how can we use that effectively as an organization is kind of a next step now that the percentage of virtual is higher than it ever was.
Yeah. And similarly, our guidances internally, our standard processes have to evolve to allow for all that to manifest itself.
Absolutely. Yeah, because there's a negative to everything kind of being digital and electronic and durable too, right? If you're not careful. Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely.
I have my next question kind of relates to an audience question as well. It's going to be around sort of what our colleagues in marketing would call KPIs, but sort of your digital performance metrics. And so much has changed in the last year. I know I'm not going to sound like a broken record by the end of this hour, but perhaps did you have your sort of digital performance metrics as set up at the start? Is it something you did at all? And where are you now? Is it something you've been able to implement? What are they? I have a question here. Has anyone run analytics of KOL, age-related uptake and enthusiasm of virtual communications, asking as this may guide targeted, inform communication engagement pathways? And that's what it's about, is how can we ensure that we're delivering content and value and messaging in the way that HCPs or KOLs would like. So where are you in your digital performance metric journey?
It's funny because I'm the operations person, so I imagine there's anticipation that I would pipe right in here. We have not, for a few reasons. Interventionalists tend to be very tech savvy, so uptake is not a problem that we've had with our particular specialty. We're also a much smaller company, so we haven't really analyzed the data in this type of way. We're really still focused on the broader, longer term qualitative KPIs in terms of medical affairs output and delivery on the strategy.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to medical affairs, quantity is never really the metric that you want any of your stakeholders to focus on, because you can have a conversation but not really have an engagement that is meaningful or impactful. So while we still monitor those quantities, it's the quality that we're trying to garner, and what kind of insights are you getting, and are those insights converted into an action? And I think when that happens, that is something measurable and communicable to your internal stakeholders. So I think that's the shift that everyone wants to go to, but always the question is, well, how do you do it in a digital forum? And as your content evolves, I think we're going to get to a point where we can now have more digitally relevant insights being generated and quantifiably bring that back to our organization.
I agree with that. I think it's a really difficult one because our commercial teams still think about quantity. So although we've been talking about quality for many, many years and looking at various things like net promoter scores and measures of customer satisfaction, quantity still comes up because people want to understand what the return on investment on things are. And I think with digital, we can do certain things that are perhaps our sales teams have been doing for many years. So email click-through rates, how many people actually open a website that you've developed. There are some quantification measures on engagement you can identify, but I agree the overall principle has to be back to that individual customers. Did you give them what they wanted? It has to come back to the quality. But we do need to build in, and I think this is a need for medical to actually, ultimately, as much as we don't necessarily like it, demonstrate that if we have created something, people have seen it, read it, used it in some way. And digital allows us to capture that perhaps far better than we've been able to do before.
Yeah, I think quantity versus quality is a great thing. Quantity without quality is typically useless and maybe even negative. And if you have great quality, it tends to then lead to quantity eventually, because word of mouth and the value of what you're doing and the decisions that you're making. And so quality is really important. I think, building on what you both said, there's two sides to that as well. One is the venue itself. So like we're on Zoom right now. Zoom doesn't have any opinion as to the quality of what we're saying. It doesn't have any metrics as to who shared the most and who didn't, or who got the most questions. Other venues like our overtime venue have all of that. So you can see the quality of the actual interactions of the people conversing about whatever as digital output, as measures that you can look at. And that might help you in selecting participants for future engagements or for follow-up or various things. And then the flip side is again, if there's no insight generated as an example of that dialogue, it didn't move the needle. And so I think digital venues are great because the cost to convene is lower. So you can be more pointed in what you're trying to discuss or do. You don't have to plan for an 8-hour expensive, heavy logistics sort of interaction. And I think that can drive deeper discussion. You're not as time boxed either virtually. With the agenda, we have to move the next topic. The agenda says we have to move. You don't have some of those pressures. And so that lets you kind of drill down until you've kind of exhausted the topic that you're interested in far easier. And that leads to better insights and better action.
I think, kind of wrapping up that topic, Matt, I remember a couple of years ago, I was presenting on KPIs and building a program in medical. And I got multiple audible reactions when I said that my team had never had, a minimum interaction, quota for MSLs. I think, just amongst this group, it's clear that in our organization, things have really changed over the past couple of years. And particularly in the past year, as I think, we have almost been forced to think more about quality and less about quantity. So I think to the audience, I would say more broadly, if this is a shift that is still going on in your organization, really think about, what is the quality, what does your medical affairs organization offer the organization more broadly and physicians? And think about how you craft metrics that truly show how you impact that, and try to walk away. This is the perfect time, cut the cord, walk away from those old school metrics that everyone was kind of required to use because the commercial team thought they were important.
I just want to touch upon what Kate just said. Walking away from what didn't work is the opportunity we have today. And it gives us that courage to be able to say, well, that's no longer relevant. Why are we even doing it? And as leaders across industry, we need to be able to do that now so that we go into the future in a much more sensible and streamlined path. So I agree with that, Kate.
We talked to a lot of folks who are frustrated because historical metrics say we should measure this, but now we're digital and it makes no sense. Yes. We're trying our best to somehow kind of fill the numbers in to kind of sort of make it look like it fits the preconceived, that exercise is really frustrating, to your point. And you're right. Never was that saying, never let a crisis go to waste or whatever. This is an opportunity to say, like, this is just stop. I'm not going to try to force fit your quantitative framework on what I'm doing anymore, because it doesn't make sense.
I think part of that as well is we all know the value of medical affairs in medical. It's how do we track it? And digital allows us now to perhaps capture feedback far more efficiently than we could do before. Sometimes even building in a satisfaction questionnaire digitally into your content can be very quickly allow you to gain that survey, which nobody otherwise filled in, very, very fast and more efficiently. So I think we can use the digital tools that we have to actually capture more continuous ongoing quality feedback, which provides perhaps a bit more for a reliable measure of performance as well, and an ongoing performance.
One of the most powerful weapons of any customer-facing organizations is the voice of the customer. If you can represent the voice of the customer to management or peers, we should do this because the customers want this, say this, they don't like that. It gives you a lot of ammunition to have really good conversations. And digital, again, gives you many times that verbatim, don't just take my word for it, look at what they said, look at the survey results, look at what they commented, look at this three-minute video of Dr. Jones saying we should stop doing this as an industry. And it really allows you to provide more organizational change upwards because you have these durable assets coming out of your engagement with digital that you didn't have before. It was just take my word for it, and someone else could say, well, I was in a meeting 2 weeks ago and someone else said exactly the opposite, so I don't believe you, or whatever. So use that to your advantage is something that I think a lot of organizations are doing, and leaders in organizations are doing to augment their arguments and accelerate the pace of change.
Yeah, and the concept of surveying is also really interesting. In the past, you send a survey to your customers, wait a few weeks, gather the data and figure out what it means, right? And today you can get a feedback instantly, right? Just a touch of a button, get that feedback, and it's so much more relevant. And you can make quick changes to reflect what you're hearing.
Yeah, the feedback loop is interesting because the time frame, historically, it takes so long to get the feedback. By the time you get the feedback, you don't need the feedback anymore. So the feedback is more just validating the decision you've already made, or letting you know you've already made a big mistake, but it's too late.
Yeah.
I want to open up a poll for the audience now. It's going to be around MSL headcounts. We've got two here actually related. You should see those come up on your screen now. So first is around how will the MSL headcount change. Answers there ranging from increase, depends on therapeutic area, and then also looking at whether it will decrease also. And then following on from that question, has your opinion changed since the pandemic started in regards to that MSL headcount? And just whilst I leave that open and give you a couple of more minutes to answer the question, I've had a couple of popular audience questions come through as well. First is, I'll answer two simultaneously because they're quite related. The first is, what specific tools have you used to engage with HCPs through the pandemic, and what has been the most impactful, successful tool, and something we've touched on sort of peripherally as well. How do all of you manage physicians' saturation with webinars and virtual events and so on? Because some HCPs don't want virtual stuff. I'll leave those open and someone jump in, please.
I can go. I think in terms of tools, obviously video conferencing has been a big one. We rolled out Zoom into Sanofi before the pandemic, so we had that in place. And that was obviously the first most obvious step because we had that technology fully rolled out and fully workable. In the UK, the NHS also rolled out Microsoft Teams to every single NHS employee, which meant that we had to adopt Microsoft Teams as well because it just works better. So I think the right tool is the one, sometimes in hospitals and health systems, is the one that works from an IT perspective without any issues, or as less issues as you can have. And usually if people have bad experiences with the technology, they don't want to use it again. So I think from my perspective, the digital tools, digital that works with that individual customer and works with their IT system is very important. I think the other piece around webinars and how do you engage with more impact? This is exactly the challenge we have this year. And this is where we're moving from large national webinars to perhaps localized workshops, platforms where you can have that two-way exchange. We're also going to do more things like podcasts, more two-way exchange, because people don't necessarily want to go to a webinar and just listen. They want to be part of it as well, and perhaps run it more at a local level than a national level. Some of the webinars are not important, we're still doing them, but we're trying other tools as well that again work for that individual customer and their team rather than a widespread national generic webinar.
Yeah, and Eddie, I think one size will not fit all. I think at this point, our customers are going to dictate what type of technology works for them, depending on their institution, their firewalls, our own firewalls. But I think as industry, we're going to have to be able to pivot on different types of tools, depending on our customer, and have them readily available, and also be well versed on a few of them, depending on what the customer is utilizing, right? So you mentioned Microsoft Teams, Zoom, whatever the future brings, because I don't think that's where it ends. And the traditional WebEx, which is now becoming more versatile in the offerings it has within itself. But also the customer's needs on what they want to hear from you is going to dictate what type of webinars, snippets, or information you give. And once again, that means our customer-facing organization needs to be able to quickly pivot and address what's needed in a short period of time, depending on what the customer is asking. So the time to preparation is going to be much smaller than it ever was before. It could even be minutes where you're figuring out, well, let me just switch to this tool and show you this little 2-minute video because I know you have a patient coming in. And that's all real time, and we need to be able to pivot to our customers.
I agree. I think a lot of it is about quality, right? And thinking, how we can really meet their needs. I love the idea, Eddie, about participation, right? So we found interactive case reviews to really be a much more appealing format than a didactic presentation given over Zoom. Another place where we've had success is partnering with societies. So all of us are kind of in this boat together of, how do we continue to engage this core audience, right? So really thinking about how industry and societies can partner together to deliver great education is another theme that we've seen.
All right, I'm going to end the polling now and get some thoughts from our panelists. How will MSL headcount change? Majority of people think that it will increase at 25%, 21% say it will be remain the same, 10% saying it will decrease by 10%, 11% saying it will decrease by 25%, and 3% saying it will decrease by 50%, whilst the majority actually think it depends on a therapeutic area, which does make sense. And then the second part to that question, has your opinion changed since the pandemic? Yes, we'll see a decrease at 29%. Interesting. 21% say they'll see an increase, 50% saying there'll be no change, 6% say that no, there'll be a decrease, 13% say no, there'll be an increase, and no, 17% there'll be no change. I think what we can see there, 65% of people first off saying that their opinion has changed, which is probably aligned with what most people, at least on the panel, I believe, with we had no idea what was going to happen at the start, and if you could predict what was going to change, I'm sure you'd be a very rich person right now. But reverting back on the MSL headcount change, hopefully you can see those results in front of you, panelists. Is that aligned with what you would expect? Is that what you too believe will happen?
I think it does depend on therapy area. Go on, Sano.
No, go ahead, Eddie.
So I think it does depend on therapy area. So the role of MSLs in medical is far greater in certain specialty care areas than perhaps primary care. I think on headcount, we have to, it's a difficult answer, but ultimately it's about how do you define the new MSL role in the virtual world. And I think companies that can define that really well, there will be a change in headcount. There may actually be an increase. But if you can't, then of course, if they're not traveling all day, then you could make a very simple financial case to say you need less MSLs. So I think it comes back to that job description and redefining what the MSL role of the future is in the virtual world that we're operating. And I think that applies to the sales teams as well. Over to you, Sano.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I would think that it's very likely it could increase, but it all depends on what that role definition is. And there's been surveys out there that show that our customers are looking for more of a scientific dialogue. 70 to 80% feel the MSL role is very important to them. because they are having a scientific dialogue. And keeping that in mind, you would almost expect that we increase our numbers in order to be able to deliver to our customers. But for that to happen, our role would be slightly more expanded than it is today. And that would, every organization will look at that differently. But I do envision a shift in how we communicate, what we communicate, how broadly we communicate, and how frequently we communicate. And then every therapy will have a different need.
Yeah, I think that digital really, really supports how MSLs need to communicate well, because I'm generalizing, but an MSL or Med Affairs discussion with a client is definitely more complicated or more complex in its content than a commercial. Here's a detail of my therapy or what have you. In digital environments, again, if you're moving beyond the whole, we're just replicating like here's a quick Zoom and it's just a face-to-face and we're just mimicking a live interaction on digitally, but you move toward a little bit more sophisticated use of digital tools, having data available, having articles available, having, again, being able to capture dialogue in real time, being able to kind of have an interaction with a physician that occurs over a little bit of period of time. So there's time to stop and think and review material and come back and continue the dialogue in context. Digital allows those sorts of things, those more complicated, data-driven scientific dialogues to happen more easily than trying to pack it into a 3-minute detail sort of headset. So I think even when you look at the tools, the virtual and digital tools that you see kind of coming out of commercial, a lot of them are more trying to, the e-detail the future sort of headset versus the facilitation of complicated dialogue to a great outcome, which is, I think, where you see more of the innovation. And I think that supports the mission of an MSL completely.
Yes, I think there are going to be some really interesting innovations coming out in this space in the next few years. But I think we'll continue to see trends towards larger medical affairs teams. We also see the corresponding data that shows how physicians have changed where they get their information. So, I think we'll continue to see those trends in parallel. For med tech, the answer is definitely we will have more MSLs. We tend to be a little less mature on the medical affairs side of the business in our industry, but that is rapidly changing as customers' demands rapidly change.
I am going to launch another poll right away because I want to get at least one more in before we finish in 8 or so minutes. So this one should be back up in front of you. What do you predict will be the biggest change medical affairs will experience over the next 5 years? And I assume all of these will happen, but I want to know I guess where you see the biggest change occurring, and I can see a number of votes coming in live, so I'll leave that open for a little bit longer, but I'd actually like to come to the panelists right away and hear your answers on this as well, because there's some diverse options there, and I'd be interested to get this conversation in before at least we run away on the hour.
Yeah, I mean, I know I think all 4 of them, but the one that stood out for me really is our customer engagement model and the diversity of our customers. And we always think HCPs and KOLs, but I think it gets broader. It becomes our payers, it becomes our patients, our large institution networks, and the ability to look at the data and implement it in the appropriate scenarios based on who your customer is. So a dynamic medical affairs colleague is someone who can look to each of those different stakeholders and deliver the message that is pertinent to them, utilizing the data that's pertinent to them. So I think that's going to be the biggest disruption in the future.
Agreed. I mean, you will see changes in all of these options. For me, the one I think about the most and resonates in my type of organization is a bigger share of voice for medical affairs and business strategy. So within my organization, medical affairs actually leads, business unit wide strategic planning, which is a model I love and think has a great outcome for the business and for the customer. And I think that will continue to change. We actually use the platform for that engagement internally, which was a surprising but great use of the platform when a Zoom meeting would have been very painful. So.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. The last one enables the other three to a degree. You have different ways you can communicate. You can be more complex with your and dynamic with your engagement models. You'll have more, again, that varied customer input, which will help you affect business strategy. And you can actually, discuss and share data more prevalently. So it's almost like the fourth one's at the foundation, and the other three are then like the positive flywheel are accelerated with these different options of communication.
I agree. I don't have a huge amount to add to that because I'm completely aligned with this group. I think ultimately, yes, it is about the customer. I think there's a very important point that Oksana mentioned, which is around who your customer actually is. As healthcare systems get more and more complex, more integrated, larger, is it really the physician KOL on the ground? Because we know across all healthcare systems, they're perhaps losing their influence around prescribing all over the world. So a medical will play a very key role as I suppose the disease expert, but also the drug expert on managing those complex conversations with both healthcare professionals, but also what we call the UK relevant decision makers, which is a very wide group of people beyond the physician on the ground.
Results being shared on your screen now. 30% agree with more dynamic customer engagement models, 29% bigger share of voice for medical affairs, shift from face-to-face at 23%, and 11% have become more data-driven. But I think you're right, Lance, that actually they're all interconnected, and to do one is to hopefully enable another within a larger system. So now I want to come back to you because you made an interesting point about more sort of dynamic customer engagement models and someone in medical affairs having the tools to engage with a large range of stakeholders externally. But I think, interestingly, more dynamic customer engagement models from a medical affairs perspective, and it kind of relates to that third one, is actually that bigger share of voice and being able to work with your marketing and commercial colleagues to create a holistic customer engagement model where it's not just product information or delivering content with multiple opt-ins to get the data, but it's actually delivering scientific information and bringing it all together. Is it something you've started to experience internally throughout the pandemic, and
Yes.
is it going to continue, hopefully?
It has to continue for us to be successful in our role, because when you look at those customer models, they're looking back at our companies as a one whole. So when we bring in our internal stakeholders to work together, understand the needs, bring in the data, bring in the messaging collectively together, and then you put it out to our customer, that is what good looks like. And that's where we are all striving to get to, right? But it's no longer the model where each person's working in silo. As Kate mentioned, we all have to be creating our strategic plans together, understanding our customer models together, and bringing the data together. And then we separate into lanes based on our guidances on how to communicate. But the work beforehand allows for us to seamlessly execute to our customer.
Eddie, is it something you've experienced as well?
Yes, I think it's not a new issue. I'd say it's the first point. So this is not pandemic related. Collaboration between medical and commercial has always been very important. And as our customers and health systems get more complex, that collaboration becomes more and more essential. I think what we're also seeing is perhaps new roles, new innovative roles forming, which just did not exist before, around service pathway mapping, professional relations, stakeholder engagement leads, the roles that may or may not sit in the medical function that are almost set up to meet the needs of our customers. So I think it's getting more complex in terms of the job type as well, beyond traditional medical affairs and traditional marketing and sales functions. We're all ultimately looking for one thing, which is a solution for the customer. Where it sits, I think, is more challenging internally.
I'm going to launch one last poll, and it says, what has been the most positive development you've seen since the pandemic? I'm going to leave those answers in front of you and then come to my panelists for one final comment before I allow everyone to carry on with their days. Obviously, we've talked about virtual engagement for the last hour. Your final tip for the audience, and when it comes to virtual engagement, what is the most important thing they should be focusing on now, or what is your, their takeaway from this last hour? What would you want it to be for them?
I think it's all about mindset. Being versatile and agile in your approach is going to make everything else work smoothly. But if you're strict in your mindset, you're just not going to evolve. So that's the biggest one for me from that list.
Agreed. Building on that, I think back to what we were talking about earlier with never let a good crisis go to waste. This is really a pivotal opportunity for so many of us to look at how we do things, evaluate what works and what doesn't, and make disruptive changes that will benefit our organizations and departments for the long term. So, really think critically about how you can evolve and how you can get that done, and go ahead and do it.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I just add, digital and our current world it creates choices. And the more choices we have, sometimes we also lead to more paralysis in our decision making because we have so much choice. And my focus is always to go back to the customer and just ask them what they want. Because ultimately that is what we're here to do. We're here to serve our customers. And if we're giving them what they want, the rest almost doesn't matter too much.
Yeah.
I would add to that too. Just learn what's available. So the equivalence, imagine you had Microsoft Office and you only ever bothered to learn MS Word. You never looked at a spreadsheet. You never looked at a PowerPoint. I know MS Word. I'll use that for everything. That would be limiting, right? And it's the same thing in this world. You need to know the different choices and how they work and how they don't, so you can build the right programs for the audience.
Eddie, Sanal, Kate, so thank you so much for joining us and taking some time out of your day. I wanted to end with a final thank you to Lance and Within3 for being our partners on this webinar, to Ellie and the rest of the team who you can't see but have put some tireless work in to make this all happen and ensure that we have a great discussion, which I hope you have enjoyed. I will let you carry on with your day. Thank you so much for joining. And if you you'll see the on-demand version within in your inbox within a couple of days. Feel free to share far and wide. Thanks everyone, and enjoy your day.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye-bye.